It was still nighttime when the reserve guards heard a different roar. Deep, desperate. They ran toward the gate and froze. In front of them, a gorilla was running at full speed, carrying an unconscious lion cub in his arms. Behind him, an injured lioness followed, not attacking, not roaring. She only stared with a mix of fear and hope. The gorilla reached the gate, slammed the metal bars, and lifted the cub into the air. For a moment, everyone stood still. There was no sound, only the cry of the animal under the rain. And then one of the guards shouted, "He's alive!" What happened next left the entire world speechless. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, from which city are you watching this story and at what time? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like if you enjoyed it. Now, let's go back to the beginning to understand how it all started. Dawn had not yet touched the horizon. The jungle slept under a thick fog, and the air was so still that even the insects seemed to hold their breath. The reserve guards walked silently along the perimeter, used to that mysterious calm that comes before daylight. Only the crunch of mud beneath their boots broke the silence. Suddenly, a roar shook the distance. It wasn't a normal roar. It was deeper, longer, filled with something none of them had heard before. Desperation. The men stopped, staring into the forest, trying to locate the sound. Another roar followed, closer, fiercer. But then something changed. Amid the echoes of the valley came another sound. A heavy, rhythmic thud, like something large pushing its way through the jungle. One of the guards raised his binoculars, searching through the mist, and then he saw it. A massive black shadow moving fast. His heart skipped a beat. "It's a gorilla," he whispered. The others turned toward him in disbelief. In that part of the reserve, gorillas rarely came near the base. They were shy, peaceful animals that avoided all human contact. But this one wasn't fleeing. He was running toward them. The figure emerged from the forest, an adult male, covered in mud and leaves, breathing heavily. He held something tightly against his chest. When the first light of dawn revealed him, they saw it clearly. A lion cub, motionless, soaked, barely breathing. The guard at the gate felt chills creep down his spine. None of it made sense. A gorilla carrying the young of its greatest natural enemy. And behind him, between the trees, a golden shadow limped forward. A lioness, bleeding from a wound on her leg, but still approaching. Not roaring, not attacking. Her eyes were fixed on the gorilla and her cub. The men stepped back. Instinct told them to raise their weapons, but no one moved. The silence was so deep they could hear the rain dripping from the leaves. The gorilla came forward until he stood before the gate. He paused, panting heavily. His dark eyes met the guards. Then he slammed the gate. Once, twice, 3 times. The metal vibrated with a thunderous echo. It wasn't anger. It was a plea. A raw, desperate plea. The gorilla lifted the cub above his head. Raindrops fell over them both. The humans stood frozen, unsure whether to approach or run. The lioness moved forward slowly, sitting beside him, panting. Their eyes met. And for a brief instant, something impossible happened. 2 natural enemies. 2 opposite forces. United by the same fear. No one spoke. Only the wind stirred the leaves. One of the guards, voice trembling, dared to say, "I think the cub is still breathing." The gorilla looked down at the tiny body in his arms. The breathing was weak, but present. He turned to the humans and struck the gate again. With such force, the sound echoed like thunder. Then the reserve chief shouted, "Open the gate! Now!" The men rushed. The screech of metal opened the way to a scene no documentary could ever imagine. The gorilla crossed slowly, holding the cub in both hands. The limping lioness followed, without hesitation. She didn't roar, didn't attack. She simply walked behind him in silence. And so, under the first light of dawn, the 2 oldest enemies of the jungle crossed together into human territory. Behind the gate, the men watched silently, knowing they were witnessing something that happens once in history. Life and death, side by side, in a silent plea for compassion. That dawn, the jungle did not roar. The jungle asked for help. The gate shut behind them with a metallic groan. Rain kept falling, thin and steady, washing mud from the ground. The guards didn't move. The gorilla stood in the middle of the base courtyard, drenched, breathing heavily, the tiny lion cub still in his arms. A few meters away, the lioness watched him, panting, her side covered in fresh wounds. There were no roars, no threats, only a dense silence so deep it seemed to hold the soul of the entire jungle. One of the guards, Martinez, stepped forward. He had worked there for years. He had seen impossible things. Never anything like this. Easy, he whispered, not knowing whether he spoke to the gorilla, the lioness, or himself. The gorilla slowly turned his head toward him. His eyes, vast and dark, held no anger, only a plea. Martinez raised his hand slowly. "We won't hurt you," he said softly. "We want to help." The gorilla crouched, placing the cub gently on a damp blanket someone had laid out. The little body barely moved, its breathing faint, its fur dirty and soaked. The lioness stepped forward, but the gorilla extended an arm, blocking her gently like a protective father. She growled softly, not with fury, but with pain. The veterinarians came running. Dr. Elena Ruiz knelt beside the cub, checking its chest. "He has a pulse," she murmured. "Very weak, but he's alive." She looked at the gorilla and the lioness, as if asking for permission. "I need to take him inside the infirmary." No one responded, but the gorilla stepped back. His shoulders trembled. His breath was heavy, as if each second weighed an entire lifetime. Elena wrapped the cub in a blanket and handed him to an assistant who ran toward the building. The lioness let out a soft, low roar, almost a lament. The gorilla sat on the ground, placing his hands on his knees. He didn't move. He only watched. Seconds turned to minutes, minutes to hours. The sun began to pierce through the clouds, drying the mud. A beam of light fell upon them. The gorilla blinked, looked up, and something in his gaze changed. Fear faded into calm. Inside the laboratory, Elena fought against time, massaging the cub's chest, injecting fluids, cleaning wounds. Outside, silence ruled. Even the birds stopped singing. Raphael, the youngest guard, watched through the window. When the cub made the slightest twitch, he ran to the door. "He moved!" he shouted. "He's still breathing!" The lioness roared. Powerful, not in fury, but in hope. The gorilla struck his chest once, as if understanding. The guards looked at each other, eyes filled with tears. All their lives, they had witnessed nature's brutal laws. But that morning, the jungle rewrote its rules. The gorilla and the lioness weren't enemies. They were parents. And together, they were learning something humans often forget. Life unites more in its weakness than in its strength. Hours later, Elena emerged from the lab, drenched in sweat, holding the cub. "He's alive," she whispered. The gorilla and the lioness moved side by side. He lowered his head. She paused and looked at him. In that moment, there was no jungle, no cages, no fear, only the miracle of compassion where no one expected it. And as the humans stood breathless, the gorilla and the lioness waited together for life to return. The cub looked at him too, curious, and took a few clumsy steps in his direction. The guards instinctively held their breath, but the gorilla did not move. He simply watched, his dark eyes soft, patient, almost fatherly. The little lion stumbled, slipped on the wet grass, and let out a tiny squeak. The gorilla leaned forward just a bit, concerned, the way a parent reacts without thinking. The Leona lifted her head, but didn't stop her baby. She trusted. Something unimaginable just one day before. The cub reached the gorilla's enormous hand and nudged it with his tiny nose. Then he placed his paw on top of the gorilla's fingers, barely covering a fraction of them. For a moment, time froze. The gorilla lowered his head slowly until his forehead almost touched the cub's. He exhaled softly. Warm, calm, gentle. The Leona closed her eyes. Elena felt tears rolling down her cheeks. Martinez dropped his cigarette without noticing. It was not instinct. It was not survival. It was something far beyond nature's rules. It was gratitude. The cub then bounced back to his mother, climbing over her like a ball of sunlight. The Leona licked him once, softly, then looked up at the gorilla. Their eyes met. This time, there was no pain, no fear. Only a silent understanding between two beings who had shared the same nightmare. And the same hope. The gorilla stood up slowly. His massive silhouette rose against the morning light. He looked at the reserve one last time, then at the humans who had helped save a life that wasn't even theirs to protect. He beat his chest once, slow, strong, solemn, as if giving thanks. Then, he turned around and walked toward the forest. The Leona watched him go. When he vanished between the trees, she nudged her cub gently and guided him in the opposite direction, deeper into the savannah, into the world he was meant to grow in. The guards didn't speak. No one dared to. They all knew they had witnessed something that would be remembered for generations. Something no documentary, no photograph, no scientist had ever captured. Two natural enemies united by the same love. Compassion rewriting the laws of the wild. When the last rustle of leaves settled, Elena whispered the only words that made sense. Nature didn't break its rules today. It reminded us of ours. And with that, the story of a gorilla, a lioness, and a cub who survived against all odds became a legend. One that the world would never forget.